Today on episode 135 of the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, I get to talk to Brian Ahearn, the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. And today he's going to let you know how you can use influence to build relationships, to expand your authority, and get your people leading you. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it.
Welcome to this episode of Moving Forward Leadership. Stick around and learn how to achieve, excel, and become a leader that people willingly follow. Lead, don't boss. And now, here's the host of our show, Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy.
Yes, it is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, where we focus on the three domains of leadership, those being leading yourself so that you can be the best leader possible, leading your team so that you can achieve that high-performing team status through team building, and then finally, leading your organization so that you can improve your organizational output, whatever that means. And here at Moving Forward Leadership, we bring world-class guests like Brian today, and couple that with my 20 years of military experience serving as a senior Canadian Army officer, and smash them together and bring you this podcast, which I consider to be the best leadership podcast going. So it's so great to have you here, folks. If you want more, always check out movingforwardleadership.com for everything revolving around our ecosystem. And today we have Brian Ahearn here on the show, who is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. He is an international trainer, a TEDx presenter, a consultant. He specializes in applying science of influence in everyday business situations. Brian's one of only 20, yes, one of 20 in the world who currently holds a Cialdini Method Certified Trainer designation. So when I say world-class guests, this is what I'm talking about, folks. People like Brian here. As well, this specialization was earned directly by Robert B. Cialdini himself, and who is the most cited living social psychologist on the science of ethical influence. So Brian knows what he's talking about. He literally got trained by the guy who basically, literally wrote the book on this stuff. And influence is so important because if we don't influence our people, we don't influence the people around us, we cannot achieve those things that we need to achieve as leaders. It is that simple. We need the ability to influence. So this is why I got Brian here, for these reasons. All right. That is it. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Chief Influence Officer Brian Ahearn about influencing people. Brian, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's so great to have you here.
I'm excited to be on the show, Scott.
So one of the things I like to do with my guests is get them to give a little bit of background about themselves, who you are, where you come from, how you got to where you are today before we really dive into the nuts and bolts of our conversation. So why don't we kick off there first?
Okay. Well, I spent the vast majority of my career in the insurance industry, more than 3 decades there. And about almost 20 years ago, bumped into some material from a man named Robert Cialdini. He's a professor at Arizona State University, now retired. But he's the most cited living social psychologist in the world when it comes to the science of influence. And when I encountered his material, I realized, wow, this is the foundation of all selling. And I was involved with sales training. And the psychology that he talked about, it explained why some sales techniques that we're taught, why they work so well and why others don't. And I really became enamored with it and started utilizing his information in all the training that I was doing. And as fate would have it, we crossed paths. And back in 2008, I got certified to teach on his behalf. There's only 20 of us in the world who are certified to do this. And I knew this is what I would want to do with the rest of my career. And so while I was working the corporate job and utilizing all of this information, I was also building my presence outside the four walls. built the website, started blogging, increased social media presence, because I knew this is what I would do one day. And at the end of 2018, I decided it was time to step away from the corporate gig. And now influence people is what I do full time, where I speak, train, coach, and consult all around the science and psychology of influence.
That's so neat. You are a litmus test for me, because effectively what you're doing is what I am doing. So I'm just a few steps behind you. I'm not ready to retire yet, but 6 years from now, moving forward leadership will go full time, just like what you've done over there at Influence People. So we're talking about influencing and influencing people. To set, I guess, the framework for the conversation today, why don't we just get a clear understanding exactly what influence is from your perspective?
Okay.
What is it?
That's a great question. When I ask people, and I use the terms influence and persuasion pretty much interchangeably, but when I ask people, give me your layman's definition of persuasion, what I will hear more than anything, Scott, is to change somebody's thinking or to convince them of something. And so then I'll ask people, I'll say, how many parents are here? And the hands go up, and I'll say, okay, so when you say to your son or daughter, clean your room, do you want them to say A, Mom, Dad, that's a good idea? Or B, get in there and clean their room? And everybody gets it at that point. It's not enough that somebody thinks what you're talking about is a good idea if you don't ultimately change their behavior. An example from the industry that I came from, insurance. If I had a conversation with you, Scott, and I told you about the dangers of texting and driving, and you nodded your head and you're like, wow, it's a really big problem. So I've changed your thinking. But if you get in your car and you text and drive, you're still part of the problem. I haven't changed your behavior. So my definition that I ascribe to comes from Aristotle. And Aristotle said that persuasion was the art of getting someone to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. Now, if you think about it, it's a great definition, right? Somebody's not doing what you want or need them to do. So how you ask, how you communicate may make all the difference between them saying yes and doing it or not doing it. So that's my definition for persuasion.
That's neat that you use influence and persuasion interchangeably, because I've heard and I've seen other people where they kind of have influence as a positive thing. I'm going to influence people to make the right choices. I'm going to influence them to do good things, blah, blah, blah. But then other people go persuasion at the negative side of, I'm going to persuade this person to do what I want them to do, not necessarily what's good or right with them. But you've kind of said they're together. So how do we differentiate between the positive aspect of them and the negative aspect of them?
Okay. Well, first I'll say this about influence and persuasion. The real difference is, like, I can be a person of influence. I can't be a person of persuasion. I can be persuasive, right? So I'm looking at them as verbs. I can influence you. I can persuade you. There are people who are influential, not because they understand the science, but maybe just because of who they are. And they can even actually do things wrong and still get positive results simply because of who they are. But to go to the question about, well, what's the negative side? The negative side, we call it manipulation. And nobody wants to be manipulated. So when I talk about ethical influence, that's the opposite of manipulation. When I talk about ethical influence, there's three things that have to happen. First, I have to be truthful. And it's not enough to tell the truth. I can't hide the truth either. If there's something that I know would impact your decision and I'm not telling you that, then I'm not being ethical, okay? So I tell the truth and I don't hide the truth. Good persuaders understand that they can talk about the negative or the downside maybe of their product or service or idea and gain credibility and still move that sale forward. The next thing is that we talk about, you can only use the psychology that's natural to the situation. So by that, I mean, most people know that people will be more influenced to take action if they think they're going to lose something. We call that scarcity. But unfortunately, a lot of people will invoke a false scarcity. They'll put arbitrary deadlines on you. They will tell you something's in limited supply when it's not really, just because they know that'll like grab you in your gut and make you think, oh, I got to act right now. But that's not ethical if there's something that's not truly scarce. The third thing that we say is it has to be mutually beneficial. What I'm proposing for you has to be good for you, and it has to be good for me too. If it's only good for me, then I'm taking advantage of you. But if what I'm putting out there I know is in your best interest, even if I'm getting a commission or something out of it, I still can look you in the eye and say, this is a win-win. So it's honesty, it's using psychology natural to the situation, and it's creating win-win opportunities for people. If I'm doing all three of those, I'm not manipulating, I'm being an ethical influencer or an ethical persuader.
Yeah, we can definitely see that. I would totally agree with that. And the difference is obvious as you explained it, right? Manipulation being that negative side. And ethics definitely come into play here because, like you said, if I'm holding back something or I'm doing it just for my gain, then obviously it's no longer influence or even persuasion for you. It's manipulation, which is definitely the negative side to that. And here, moving forward, leadership, I talk about that the audience, they're here, they're hungry because they want to be leaders. They don't want to be those quote unquote bosses, right? And those bosses are people who would probably be a little bit more manipulative. So for the people out there who want to be leaders, they want to inspire, they want to motivate, they want to, get their people, get their teams to peak performing. They want their organizations to hit that maximum output, whatever it is for their organizations. They need to influence their people. They need to get them to go in the right direction, follow the vision that I have laid out. So how do leaders go about influence their people in the right way so that they get the best results from their time?
Okay. Well, I follow a framework, and I think this framework works extremely well for leadership. It works well for coaching. It works well for sales too. I think leaders, first and foremost, need to build relationship. They have to build relationships where people say, I want to follow that individual. Not that I have to, but I want to. And then just because people like you, though, they still may be in this state of uncertainty. I'm not sure what to do. I like you, but I don't know what I should be doing. So leaders then have to help people overcome that uncertainty. And then the final phase is moving people to action. Because sometimes we have people who like us, they're not unsure what to do. They're just dragging their feet. They're not doing it. And so we need to move them to action. And within that framework of relationship, uncertainty, and motivation, there are principles of influence that are more effective to help you build the relationship, to overcome the uncertainty, and to motivate people to action. And if you want, we can talk about what those principles are within that context.
Absolutely. If you leave a hole like that for me, I got to dive into it. I like these little rabbit holes. So let's dive in. What are those principles that leaders should be looking at in this context for sure?
Well, when we talk about building a relationship, there are three principles that come into play. One is called the principle of liking, principle of unity, and also reciprocity. Now, all of these things that I described, your listeners are going to get. They're going to just intuitively understand it because we're describing human behavior, and they're all human beings. And they're going to either think like, oh, wow, that's why I'm effective, or wow, that's how the salesperson maybe got me to buy something. But they're going to get it on one of those levels. So the principle of liking says that we prefer to say yes to those we know and like. Right? We all get that, right? It's easier to say yes to somebody that we look at as a friend versus somebody who's a complete stranger. So if a leader can tap into this principle, if they can not just get people to like them, but the real key here, Scott, is that they work on coming to like the people that they're leading. Because if I'm a leader and you can tell that I really like and care for you, that's where you're going to be far more open to whatever I would ask, because deep down we believe friends do right by friends. And if you believe that I like and I care for you, you will be so much more open to what I ask because you'll believe that's probably in your best interest. And the good news is the more I come to know and like you, the more I want your best. And so we have this virtuous cycle where I'm putting out what I believe is in your best interest. That's how you're receiving it. And we have a much, much better relationship as a result. So that's one principle.
Just to dive in there,
okay.
that takes a lot of time, though, right? That takes a lot of effort because in order to build those relationships, you have to do the work. You can't just show up and say, okay, I'm running this section, I'm running this company, or I'm running this department, division, whatever, and automatically assume that these relationships are going to be built immediately and be concrete immediately, right? So to me, that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of deliberate, focused effort at getting out, meeting your people, talking to your people, actually listening to what they have to say, caring about, about them, like you said, and beyond just the workplace though. And it caring, to that deeper level of how are your kids, how is your family, how was your weekend, how was your holidays, etc.
But the good news, Scott, is when you begin to understand this principle, there are things that you can do to accelerate that. So you don't have to wait months or years to say like, wow, I've got a good relationship with Scott. By looking at what you have in common. So as a leader, making a strategic thought to say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to visit these people for the first time. I want to learn as much as I can before I get there. Because when I meet Scott, I want to be able to talk to you about something that we have in common. And right away, that makes me like you a little bit more because I see you as being like me. And you tend to like me a little bit more because you're like, hey, this guy Brian's a pretty good guy. He's like me. We've got this in common. So very thoughtfully doing that. If I can't find it out beforehand, then I'm very thoughtful in the questions I ask to try to uncover those things that we have in common. So that's one way. And the second way is to pay genuine compliments. Catch people doing things well and making sure that you mention it. Because the more I do that, the more I'm paying compliments to you, the more I'm convincing myself, Scott's a good guy. Scott's good at what he does. He works hard. I've got all these positive thoughts about you that make me like you. But at the same time, you appreciate that these sincere compliments are coming, that you're being recognized. So those are two simple things that a leader can really focus on to invoke this principle and really kickstart the relationships that they have with the people that they're leading.
Yeah, no, that is definitely 100% true. All right, so before I kind of semi-cut you off there, let's carry on from what's after building the relationship. So obviously we spend our time, we build those relationships, we get the trust between us and our people. What's next?
Well, within that relationship, there's two other principles, though. We can tap into unity, and you'll get this being in the military. Unity is about shared identity. It goes much deeper than...
No idea what you're talking about. Not a clue.
I told you as we were exchanging emails, my father served in the Marines. And I saw this from the time I was a little boy, that when my dad met another Marine, particularly one who'd been in combat, I felt like he was closer to them than me, his own flesh and blood. And now I understand why. Because this psychology of unity says it's not you and me, it's we. I see my identity in you and you see your identity in me. And therefore, helping you is like helping me. And that's why in organizations like sports teams and military and bands and things like that, that cohesiveness that you work so hard to form, because then it's not about any individual, it's about everybody. And when you find that you have that in common with somebody and you can raise it to the surface, that's where relationship building again it's accelerated. If I didn't know that about you, it might take longer to form that relationship. But once we find out we have that thing that we share, and I'm looking at you saying, man, you're helping you is like helping me, man, the relationship just takes off at that point. So that's another way that we can build relationship. And the third psychological principle is reciprocity. Reciprocity describes that natural obligation that we feel to give back to people who first give to us. So when I'm doing things that genuinely help you as a leader, you appreciate that. I'm knocking the roadblocks out of the way so you can do your job. I'm defending you when I need to defend you. I'm giving you the praise in front of others when that's warranted. But I'm doing these acts of kindness that are beneficial for you, and you feel this obligation to want to be there and serve. When I was working in corporate America, my boss was great at this. He would routinely do things that he didn't have to do. But I tell you what, if I was up at 4 a.m, one of the first things I did was check email, because I'm like, if there's something I can get off the table for John, I'm going to do it, because he had done so much for me. So those are our three principles to build a relationship.
I think those are great, because just moving on to the unity thing, I really liked your example, obviously being military. But the way I look at it is the barriers, those immediate barriers are already broken when you have that shared unity, right?
Yep.
So when I run into other military members, so it goes from big down to small. So if I run into another military member, any military member, immediately there's a barrier broken. If I run into a Canadian Forces member, there's two barriers broken. If I run into a person of the army, that's three. If I run into an officer, there goes four. If I run it, as you go deeper and deeper,
Yep.
more and more barriers get broken. And that's one of the things I think leaders need to focus on is how do you build that culture within your organization so that you have that unity for all the reasons that you've talked about thus far and all the benefits that come with it? Because those concepts of building relationships, reciprocity, that just comes easy and natural when the culture of the organization is something that's focused on greater than individuals within it.
That's right. Because again, helping you is really helping me. And when you help me, you're really helping yourself. In other words, we're working for the greater good, for the larger body, the unity of everybody in that part of the organization. And what you were describing about how you can start out, with people in the service and then start narrowing it down, it's, you could call that uncommon commonalities. But the tighter you get in, and just like my father, anybody who served, he feels closer to. But if it's the Marines, if it's somebody who's been in combat, if it was somebody who was in Vietnam, it feels like it's a brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. Okay, so we discussed building relationships and the principles around them. So obviously influence must come easy now, right? We've built those relationships. Or am I missing something?
It's a great first start.
If
you don't have relationship, then it gets a lot tougher to do the other things. But let's assume that you're as a leader, you're doing these things and you're building these relationships that are very, very strong. But you still have people who aren't sure what to do. It could be, time of emergency. It could be just changes that are coming in with that part of the organization. And so people are wondering, what should I do? Two principles are very effective here. The first principle is the principle of authority. And authority says that we feel more comfortable saying yes to people that we view as experts. So then that means, well, what does it take for somebody to view you as an expert? They need to know about your background. You need to reference sometimes where you learned the information that you're passing along, because people may contend with your opinion, but they're less likely to contend when you're backing something up with an authoritative resource as to why you're asking people to do things. Now, having said this, even if you're really, really smart and good at what you do, if people don't trust you, then they're still not going to follow what you're saying that they need to do. And so credible authority is somebody who has expertise but is also trustworthy. And a shortcut to gaining trust is by admitting a weakness. So if I were to say, Scott, I'm not 100% sure about this, but, and then I use a transitional word like but or however, and I move into something that I do know and that I feel confident about, that's what you tend to remember. Most of the time, whatever comes before but, we tend to forget, honey, I love you, but we forget the I love you and we like, okay, the hammer is about to come down. So as a leader, I want to make sure that I am building my credibility through trustworthiness, always following through on what I say I'm going to do, sometimes putting a marker in the ground. If I'm replying to an email, I might say, Scott, as promised, here's the information I told you I'd get you by Tuesday. That marker of as promised highlights to you that Brian's a guy who does what he says he'll do. And if I do that enough, I start to, again, accelerate the trust that I'm building with you rather than just waiting years for you to look over your shoulder and go, hey, Brian's a trustworthy guy. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And you kind of decloaked the first question I always ask here.
Okay.
Because right, a bit about the guest's background and story is all revolving around that principle of authority to say, for the audience member to go, why should I listen to this person on the podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But by you giving that story, automatically kind of helps start to do exactly what you said, build that trust, give yourself, street cred or authority, authority from your words that,
Yep.
yes, you are an expert in your field. Oh, by the way, listener, he wouldn't be here if he wasn't an expert, because I screamed pretty harsh on the podcast. But you see the point, though. So it's great that you talked about the theory behind it, and now I'm saying here's the practical example of that. And we do that often in the military. We do it very often in the military. So if we get asked to give a presentation to another organization within, one of the first things that always gets done is a bio or a quick spiel about the presenter's background. Right. And it's all about building that authority to say, okay, this is why you should care what this person says because of their background. And we do that all the time. It's basically a standard operating procedure.
And for the people who are listening, it's important that you do it beforehand, because if you didn't know, for example, about my background, you may not be listening as intently as you are now. If you found out after the podcast or at the very end, you've been like, darn, I wish I would have listened to that guy more. I didn't realize that was his background. So it's important that your expertise gets out in front of you. And whenever possible, if you can have somebody else introduce you, the good thing about that is they can say things about yourself that if you say, it might sound like you're bragging. But when that other person introduces you, just like somebody who might introduce a speaker at a conference, it sounds perfectly natural.
No, that makes total sense. Okay, so you said there was two other principles. We talked about the principle of authority. What's the next one?
The other principle is the principle of consensus, or sometimes called social proof. And that highlights the fact that as human beings, we feel more comfortable when we know what other people are doing, what they're thinking, how they're feeling. We feel comfortable following the crowd. I know a lot of people kind of push back on this. They feel like, I'm an individual. I don't just follow the crowd. But I will tell your listeners, you follow the crowd far more than you realize. You are impacted by, again, how people are thinking, feeling, and behaving far more than you realize. There are times as a leader when you need to break from that so that you are seen apart from that. And that's why we call you a leader. Not everybody does that. But there are also times as a leader where you want to use this psychology to help move people. And to do that, you talk about what lots of other people are doing. Or what's even better is when you can talk about people who are most like the group that you're leading. If you can say, over at this organization, they're about our size, they do what we do, they're having tremendous success, that will mean a lot more than if somebody talks about an organization that's wholly unrelated to what they do. I mean, I've been places and I've heard, Visa talk about what they do with their learning environment. I used to run a corporate university. And for me, it was like, your Visa, your budget and resources are so unlimited compared to mine that I can't even begin to do the things that you're thinking about. But if I had listened to another insurance company that was around the same size as the one I worked with, I'd pay close attention. So a leader talking about what others who are similar, what they're doing, that tends to get rid of some of that uncertainty and give people a sense of comfort that this is what we should do.
Sometimes you have goals, but you know what? You have a hard time reaching them, and you just can't figure out why. Why is it that you can't achieve those things that you want to achieve? Maybe it's dedication. Maybe it's motivation. Maybe you haven't picked the right goals. So this is where I was not too long ago. And then I realized something. I've been developing the Power Goals program my entire life. And here it is now for you, where you can learn how to pick the right goals, figure out how to achieve those goals, how to stay on track, but most importantly, how to get back on track when you get off. So are you ready? Are ready to up your game and achieve those things that you've been meaning to achieve for so long now? Simply go to movingforwardleadership.com/power and learn more about the Power Goals program and achieve everything that you've been wanting to achieve. And now, back to the show.
it kind of goes how online business runs today, right? When you see testimonials and videos, etc., of people buying or using the product. This is a great time for me to throw a testimony in for coaching, I guess. That's a joke, but anyway, so it just kind of goes along with that. Social proof. There are a whole lot of other people out there that are doing this, or following this trend or whatever. Then therefore, obviously, it works. Now, you said something interesting that I kind of want to dive into, and you said, as leaders, sometimes we need to break away from that, though. We need to make that hard decision of, you know what? Yeah, sure. Everybody may be doing that, but we're not everybody else.
That's right.
Right? We are X organization. And here at X organization, we're going to go this way. So how should we as leaders approach that from an influence framework of everybody's looking here on the right, and it looks cushy, it looks comfy, it looks, relatively good.
Yep.
But over here, the potential is even better. However, it's going to take work. It's going to be a bit of painful, et cetera, et cetera. How do we as leaders influence our people to say, stop looking over there, what everybody else is doing, and let's go for this? Because in the end, we're going to be better off.
There's a term in psychology called diffusion of responsibility. So imagine, Scott, that we are out at some public event and somebody clearly needs help. Unfortunately, in crowded spaces like that, quite often those people don't get any help because everybody assumes somebody else will do something, right? I'm looking at you and I'm not sure what to do. And you're looking at me and you're not sure what to do. And everybody's waiting for somebody to step in. And this is where I always encourage people when I'm speaking, that I say, when you realize something needs to be done and nobody's doing anything, it's because they're all waiting for somebody to show them what to do. And when you step in, if you go to that person to help them and you turn to somebody else and say, hey, call 911 and you over there, go do this and you do that, people will start responding. And then all of a sudden, leadership can be lonely, right? If you take that first step, you don't know what's going to happen either. But I would encourage your listeners, have confidence that when you know something needs to be done, but you're not sure what to do, take that step and other people will follow and you'll figure it out. But to me, that's leadership. It's stepping into the unknown to give other people confidence that here's the direction we need to go.
It makes absolute sense to me for sure. And I love that, it's like, no, this is leadership. This is what we're meant to do as leaders. We are meant to take these steps and get people to follow us, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when we do that, and I've been there as a leader. So one of my last true, big leadership jobs, I was a squadron commander of 200 members. And there were projects, there were things, there were times when I say, hey, everybody's over here, but guess what? We're going to go there. And we're going to do this, and we're going to achieve this. And there are always, there's always those few outliers. Mm-hmm. And as much as you can influence and motivate and get the bulk of the people on board, there are always those handful of people that are skeptical, cynics, potentially even, negative Sallys or whatever have you. How do we should we isolate them? Should we get rid of them? Should we, put more focus on them? Should we just say, you know what? They're going to come along for the ride anyway. And if they don't want to, they can just leave. What's the best way to deal with those situations? Because they always pop up.
Well, first of all, I think if you know who those people are, and quite often they're the same people, right? It doesn't matter what you're going to do. They might say, they'll try to paint themselves in a good light, like I'm a contrarian, there always needs to be somebody who questions things. I don't just follow everybody. So they'll generate their reasons for why that behavior is the right behavior. But I think when you start identifying who those people are, if you can go to one or two of them and recruit them in a sense, give them that genuine praise that they need, maybe compliment them on the fact that, hey, you know what? I've noticed that there are times where you don't go along with everybody, and that's not all bad. Sometimes that's called leadership. And because of that quality, I want you to help with this. And Dale Carnegie in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, said, give people a fine reputation to live up to. And they'll try to live into that. There's a lot of psychology, Scott, that goes into this, but I think a lot of times people who are like off to the side there don't get asked those things. And by going and affirming that, there is a positive quality that you have here, and that is that you don't just go along with the crowd, that sometimes you're that person who's leading in the other direction. I need you to lead here. And this is what we need to accomplish, and really get them on board, because they may pull those other people along too when they see their peer, so to speak, get on board all of a sudden. So that's one tactic I would say a leader could focus on and really try to win that person over.
So basically, figure out one person you think you would have a successful chance at bringing over on your side. Kind of, sorry to say, but kind of the weakest link, right, of the negative chain, and say, okay, come on in here. Look, let's talk about this. Isolate them, and hopefully, what they can do is in turn around and influence their peers per se in this negative ring, and say, you know what, it's actually not that bad. There's a lot of good potential. We should definitely try this out and hear and follow along what the boss or what the team has to say here.
In the business environment that I spent time in, there were always people who would say things like, I don't need a pat on the back to know I'm doing a good job. And you know why they said that? Because nobody pats them on the back. And it was their self-defense mechanism that is going to just protect them from feeling bad, like I don't get the kudos that other people do. But what I found was when you would engage with those people and give them genuine praise, you're not making it up, you're not BSing them, but you look for the qualities that are actually good and you praise them and you allow them to use those qualities, that's what usually brings people on board. And then you can begin to rely on them to help you move your initiative forward.
Totally agree. And I actually have seen that happen. So one of my members was a civilian employee that we had, and he got awarded accommodation for some great work that he did. But he actively avoided getting presented the accommodation. He just wanted it, basically dropped off at his locker and not presented. So we ended up having to essentially ambush him without him knowing that it was going to be presented. But it's very similar. He never, ever got recognized. And one of the things I found when I first showed up to this job was there was very little recognition going on across all levels within the squadron. It was one of the things that I tried to make sure that we did better was recognition, whether that be public or private, and ensuring that people who did great work got recognized for it. So, for example, this guy, we got him, we quote unquote ambushed him, and we presented him with his accommodation from my boss, the base commander. And again, it's just you show your people that you care. And that helps them, and we could see the positive influence, the impacts that would have throughout.
Yeah, I think it was Napoleon who, and I'm butchering this, but basically said, men will die for medals. That public acknowledgement of bravery or whatever it was that they did to earn that medal, it's just a piece of metal, right? But and being in the military, certain things that you pin on your chest or on your shoulder mean a lot more. It is a recognition to everybody about who you are and what you've done. So our praise can operate in that same way if we do it the right way.
Awesome. So I just want to change gears a little bit. And what I want to do is highlight pitfalls, where leaders struggle, where leaders fail, so that the listener out there can go, whoa, wait now, I'm about to go down the wrong road here. I listen to this podcast and I'm about to do a left turn when I should be doing a right. So what are some of the common failures that people do when they're trying to establish influence, when they're trying to influence their people, when they're trying to build all these principles that you talked about, so that they can avoid doing that?
Well, I'll quickly hit one thing for each of the principles that we've talked about so far. When it comes to liking, people work way too hard trying to get people to like them, and you come across as like somebody who's desperate for a date when you're trying so hard. That's why it's so much easier if you just work on coming to like the other person. Okay. With reciprocity, they hear about this and they hear like, oh, it's easier for people to to say, yes, if I've done something for them first. And so they adopt this give to get mentality. But if you know I'm only doing something to get something from you, you'll begin to resist my giving. So you really have to deep down recognize, I give because it's the best way. It's the right way to do life. And then I trust that when I've helped enough other people, I've got resources to turn to who will want to help me. So don't do this give to get kind of mentality. With authority, it's very easy for people to hear, oh, authority, I'm going to invoke the fact that I'm the boss. No. That is not what we're talking about. That just produces resentment. It's about becoming that trusted expert where people look at you and they want your input because they know you're wise and they trust that it's going to be good input. And then when it comes to what we just talked about with social proof, sometimes people think like, oh, well, just highlighting a big number, that's going to move people to action. But if you highlight the wrong thing, you can actually normalize bad behavior. By that, I mean, Scott, if you were a freshman sitting in college and I was a professor and I stood up there and I said, cheating has become a big problem in college. I just read a report that says 2 out of 3 college students will cheat by the time they graduate. And then I threaten you. If I ever catch you cheating, I'm going to have you expelled from school. But what I did by saying 2 out of 3 college students cheat, I have normalized that in your mind. You're thinking, well, if everybody else is cheating, maybe I can get away with cheating. So those are mistakes where people hear these concepts and they think that they have them and they only have a surface understanding and they try to put it into practice and it doesn't work. And they think, well, when that guy Brian talks about it, it sounds great, but it doesn't work in the real world. It does. There are 70 years of research, experiments and things that clearly show if you engage these principles the right way, it will have more people saying yes to you.
That normalization thing is, man, so prevalent. Mm-hmm. It is just everywhere, and people accepting, from my side, discipline issues or poor performance or, mediocrity and stuff like that. And we see it across the basically world today, and it gets normalized. And I use an example in a recent show of different things such as the dad bod. And it's like, great, we're normalizing men being out of shape. And beyond that, we're not even just normalizing it, we're praising it. We're giving it a name and stuff like this. And it's so true. And right. I remember one of the things I did was when I took command was saying, okay, understood these problems exist, but we're going to start identifying and informing people that these are unacceptable now. Like the 2 out of 3 cheating is like, no, this stops now. This is the quote unquote normal now, but no, this has to stop here today.
Right. And when it would come to something, even if the number is small, so let's say it's only a third of students that don't cheat, but if you see that the trend is going in the right way, then you want to highlight what that trend is. Right. This year, 15% fewer students cheated than the year before, or something like that gets people focused on the fact that fewer and fewer are doing it, not that the majority are still doing it.
No, that makes absolute sense. Brian, man, as we kind of start winding down here, is there anything else that we didn't hit on before we start wrapping up the show that really, would be super beneficial to the leader or the listener right there right now?
Well, we talked about relationship uncertainty, but we didn't really get to motivating people to action. So I'll just quickly tell you that there's 2 psychological concepts that are very good to get people to take that next step and move them to act. The first is consistency. We human beings feel a lot better about ourselves when our actions line up with what we've said or done or believe in the past. And so if we can get somebody to commit to us that they'll do something, or if we can tap into what they've said in the past, what they've done, what they say they believe or value, it makes it easier for them to make a decision to act because what we're asking is right in line with really their self-identity and who they are. The other principle is scarcity, highlighting the downside of not taking action. There's a man named Daniel Kahneman who won a Nobel Prize for his work in this area. he and his late partner, Amos Tversky, statistically proved that humans feel the pain of loss about twice as much as they feel the joy of gain. So what that means for us, Scott, is rather than always going in and going, rah, 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 here's why you need to do this, sometimes you need to talk about what the downside is by not taking action. As an example, if I were a wealth advisor and you were my client, I could say, Scott, based on your age and how much longer you say you're going to work and your current income, if we can find a way for you to save just 1% more, by my calculations, you'll have an extra $100,000 in your retirement account. Now, you'll be motivated by that because you didn't know about it before. But what the research says is you'll be a lot more motivated if my conversation was, Scott, given your age, your income, and how much longer you say you're going to work, if we don't find a way for you to save just 1% more, by the time you retire, you'll have lost $100,000 of your retirement savings.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge
Feels a little
difference.
different, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Feels like that 100,000 is already yours, and you're like, the heck I am. I'm not losing that. That subtle reframe from gain to loss will move a lot more people. You don't want to come across as a fearmonger, somebody who's trying to scare people, and you don't have to. I mean, the way I explained that to you, that was just very conversational, but it got the point across that, man, there's $100,000 on the line here, and I don't want to lose it.
No, that makes absolute sense, that scarcity model. And that's why you see so often people who have heart attacks but survive, all of a sudden they become some of the fittest people on the planet because of that scarcity mindset hits them like, oh my God, I almost lost my life.
Yep.
Vice beforehand saying, oh, I can gain so much more. But then when they realize to actually see or feel or hear the potential of them losing things change.
Absolutely. It's just hardwired. I mean, it helped humans survive over the millennia because having an abundance would be wonderful, but if you didn't have enough, that could mean life or death. And so social psychologists theorize that people who are more sensitive to loss did a better job surviving and they passed their genes on.
So let's say you're working on a project and you want to highlight, obviously highlight the benefits, but with this principle, we should also highlight, the downside of not doing it, right?
Absolutely.
So is there a better way of, should the benefits come before the potential pitfalls or vice versa? Or does it matter?
I can't say that I've seen research on, if presenting one or the other first or second. I certainly wouldn't say everything you talk about, frame it in the negative. Because after a while, people are going to start to feel like, oh, you're a fearmonger, or, gosh, you're just a Debbie Downer. But highlighting why you're making a change and why you can't afford to stay the way that you are. In a lot of organizations, a move to digital. And that's a huge change. And there are people who may wonder why, or why can't we keep the old way and do the new way, and all of these questions. It will not be as effective to try to paint this rosy picture about, oh, well, once we're all digital, we're going to be like Amazon and we'll do this and this and this. No, that's not going to motivate people. But if you talk about, look, things are okay right now. But if we don't start making this digital transformation now, 5 years from now, we're going to be so much further behind. We may not be able to catch up. And that might mean we don't have a job. So, honestly, highlighting something like that will have people go like, wow, I didn't know that things were changing that fast. And now I have a platform to continue that conversation about why I think that's the case and that it's urgent that we start making these changes now.
No, makes absolute sense. Brian, man, this is a great conversation, which we could easily go longer for. But to respect your time and the listeners' time, we're going to start winding down here. But before we wrap up, I do got a last couple of questions for you. And that is, according to you, Brian Ahearn, what makes a great leader?
What makes a great leader?
Yeah.
I would defer back to the individual that I worked for when I was with the insurance company. As I said, I would have done anything for John because I knew John cared about me. I mean, he made that clear all the time in terms of our personal interaction, what he did for me. He was able to always keep a clear line between friendship and work, though. And there were times where he clearly said, I'm putting on my friend hat now. Now I'm going to put on my manager hat. and we would have different conversations. So he was very good at keeping that line. I also realized when he said he was going to retire and his parts of the organization started moving around and reporting to other people, I recognized how much crap he protected us from, so we could just keep our head down and do our job. And until you experience that, you don't realize how important it is. But once that covering was taken away and we were being hit with all this stuff, it's like, I can't get my job done here because of all this other stuff. So I think it was, John really made sure that people understood how much he cared for them as individuals, but he wouldn't let his personal feelings cross the line into a bad business decision. But you could really see that and respect it when he was having to make those tough calls that you might not have liked personally. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but those are the attributes that I saw him display that made me want to follow him, and wherever he was leading, I was going.
Love it, actually. We refer to that as top cover, getting cover from the top. And it's crucial. It's crucial just for all those same reasons you said, right? It enables you to get on with business, whatever that is, and get your job done. Mm-hmm. And the great leaders out there, you never realize that they're doing it for you until they're gone, like as in your example. Awesome. And for the final question of the podcast, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug.
Okay.
It's all about you right now.
Okay. Well, anybody listening to the podcast, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'm happy to do that. If you don't tell me in the connection where you heard me, I guarantee you I will send a message back and say, thanks for connecting. How'd you find me? I like to understand why people are reaching out. I also think social media should be social. And so by personally responding to everybody who reaches out to connect with me, there's an opportunity to get a little social mojo going there. You never know where that's going to lead to. So that would be the first place. The second place would be my website, which is influencepeople.biz. And if you go out there, there's tons of resources to continue the learning. I've been blogging for more than a dozen years, every single week for a dozen years. So tremendous amount to read. Been on almost 80 podcasts, and I categorize them all. So if you want to go listen to other podcasts, those are out there. I've done work with LinkedIn, and so I've got 4 courses on LinkedIn on persuasive selling, persuasive coaching, and other things, so you can see previews there. And the final thing I would say, Scott, since you said I could be shameless in my plug, I wrote a book that came out last August, and it's called Influence People, with the subtitle, Powerful Everyday Opportunities to Persuade That Are Lasting and Ethical. And you can order that on Amazon in paperback, or audio. It was an Amazon bestseller. This really surprised me. It was a great surprise, but an organization called Book Authority rated it as one of the top 100 influence books of all time. So I've been very, very pleased with how it's done. And I think your listeners would get a lot of very, very practical advice on how to apply this in their professional and personal lives.
No, definitely would recommend the audience checking it out. And you can do so easy. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/135. And all those links are already in the show notes for you as we record this. So they're there. Go ahead, grab them, connect with Brian on LinkedIn. He and I are already connected. Grab a copy of the book and jump on LinkedIn and do one of those courses. That's awesome. I'm going to have to do one of those myself because I didn't realize you even had that. So well done to you, sir. Well done. 80 podcasts. Holy smokes. That's a lot.
It's a great opportunity to get the message out, and it's a great opportunity to refine the message too. I love talking about this. It's my passion. It's what I'm doing with my career. So I appreciate that you invited me on the show.
No, it's my pleasure. Again, thank you for your time. Thanks for coming to talk to me, but most importantly, the audience member out there. All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember, R squared, S squared, right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for.
is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R squared, rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.